Okay, thank you all so much for joining. I'm just going to maximize my window here and welcome you all to the first session of Sub-Working Group 2.2, which is Information Sharing, Interagency Collaboration, and Policy Formulation. My name is Brian Morales. I'm the Chief of the Counter-Narcotics Branch in the U.S. Department of State in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, or INL for short. Thank you all for joining. Some of you have been here since the first of the 4-hour session. This is the last session, and we are very grateful for your endurance, and welcome to those that have just recently joined. I'm going to provide some quick administrative announcements before we get started. As I mentioned, we had 4 sessions tonight. This is the final session. Tomorrow we will have the public health sub-working groups 3.1, 2, and 3. You will access them through the same link that you did tonight's meeting or today's meeting. And we had the same sessions last week on October 17th and 18th. We had the session for the West region. So there we mostly had participants from Latin America, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Although I have noted that there are some participants here with us today from the Africa region, so you are more than welcome. And you're always welcome to choose whichever region, or if you'd like both meetings. The content is mostly the same, but in some cases we have some presenters, some unique presenters in some regions. Like today we had a presentation focused on Asia. So we do tailor it a bit when it gets to some of the discussions as well. At the bottom right hand of the screen, you see the email address where you can reach us, the Secretariat for the Coalition Working Groups and Sub-Working Groups. It is syntheticscoalition@state.gov. We welcome you to send us your comments, thoughts, and how we can make the coalition year most productive for your needs. We're happy to support you in that. Some additional points. The registration for sub-working groups and working groups will remain open throughout the calendar year, all the way through September of 2024 when the coalition comes to an end. If you need these links, again, please email us and we'll send you the links. We encourage you eagerly to share these with other colleagues in your government and also within international organizations so that we really start kind of filling in the coalition with expertise from different sectors that all have to look at this synthetics drugs challenge from their own unique vantage point. I also want to share that a new website is being developed for the coalition. And all of the presentations from today's sessions, the ones from tomorrow's sessions, the ones from last week, they will all be posted on the coalition website. But importantly, we will not be recording the comments. So we are currently recording this session. It will stop at the end of the last presentation, and the discussion period will be off the record. It will be completely sort of open for coalition members to feel comfortable in sharing, and there will be no recordings of those sessions. I also want to share that we are very fortunate to have coordinators from the international organizations that are taking notes of today's session, and they'll be preparing a meeting summary, and we will be posting that on the website as well. So if you miss a session, you can always go back and see the notes, see the recordings, and get up to speed. In addition, over the next few weeks, the Secretariat will be sending the full meeting schedule for the coming year, so you know when these meetings are going to take place. The future meetings will be taking place always at this time, so whatever time you are sort of in at the moment, that will be the time. Although some parts of the world do observe daylight savings, so there might be a shift there, but for most of the world, it will be at the same time for you. And we will be sending calendar invites, in any case, to all the participants for the next few months of meetings. We'll be doing that over the next several days, so you should have that reserved on your agendas. And I'll finally mention also that we are looking for co-chairs for sub-working groups 1.1 and 2.1. So if you are interested in participating as co-chair of one of these sub-working groups, again, please email us and we would be very grateful for your leadership in guiding these sub-working groups. Now I'm going to end by sharing the meeting schedule and explaining a bit what the progress of the meetings are going to be. The October session is focused on framing the issue, that is discussing what does our issue look like, what are the major challenges that we are facing, and sort of setting the landscape for that. The November, December, January, and February sessions are very important. This is where we start discussing what are the global initiatives, what are the best practices, the models that exist, identifying what are the different points where we can intervene on this issue, and then looking at what possible deliverables might come out of this coalition work and what commitments we can all make to start working on these different opportunities that will be discussed. The goal of the coalition is not to just discuss and to explore and to share, but also to operationalize, to look for concrete ways that we can then stimulate further some of the work that either has been ongoing and expand that, or maybe initiate completely new lines of actions that we haven't looked at before. In March, we will be having a midterm check-in meeting where the sub-working group co-chairs will report to the working group co-chairs what the progress has been in terms of their work. And then from April to June, we'll be focused on action planning and implementation of the initiatives that we discussed earlier from November to February. Then in August, we will be looking at how do we evaluate our effectiveness, and we will start looking at transitioning the work to ensure sustainability, because in September, the coalition comes to a conclusion with the final meeting where the sub-working group chairs again are reporting to the working group chairs. So that will be the final meeting. We'll have a final report, but the initiatives of the coalition will live on for years to come. We are hoping that what happens through that August month is that these initiatives get spun off into other international organizations or other processes or other organizations, agencies that will continue that work for years to come, sort of in a strengthened capacity, having been expanded through the coalition's work. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to introduce for this session our International Organization Coordinator and also the co-chairs for this sub-working group. So our International Organization Coordinator is Inshik Sim, the Program Manager at the UNODC Regional Office for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. I'll turn it over to him to give his welcome.
Thank you, Brian. This is my great pleasure to be an International Organization Coordinator for this particular sub-working group 2.2. And then as Brian introduced me, I've been working on synthetic drug matters for East Asia and then Southeast Asia and the Pacific as a regional coordinator over the last few years. It is my great pleasure to serve as international coordinator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Inshik. Then in terms of co-chairs for this sub-working group, we have Seru Pepeli Neko, the Director of the Narcotics Bureau, Senior Superintendent from Fiji. And we're very fortunate to have two great experts from Australia. We have Amber Migas, the Director from Drugs Data Collection, Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, and Shane Nielsen, Principal Advisor on Drugs, Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission as well. So I will turn it over to them to introduce themselves. I'm not sure if Mr. Neko is here with us today, but in any case, I'll pause and let the co-chairs introduce themselves and then take it away and introduce our speaker and get on with our work for today. Thank you so much. Hey, colleagues, you're muted currently.
Hello, Shane Nielsen is my name. I'm from the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission.
And unfortunately, we're getting an echo. Is there another device in your room that is broadcasting audio because your microphone is picking it up? Can we go ahead and try again, please?
Good afternoon. Shane Nielsen's my name. As Brian said, I'm the Principal Advisor Drugs at the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amber Megas, Director, Drugs Data Collection at the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission.
Wonderful, and I think that the co-chair from Fiji is not with us today, so I think we can get started with the presentation for today. Shall you introduce, or would you like me to introduce?
Certainly, we can introduce.
Thank you.
We're very pleased to introduce Jeremy Douglas, who is the regional.
And I'm sorry, you accidentally muted yourself. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, please.
We're very pleased today to welcome Jeremy Douglas, the regional representative from the Southeast Asia and Pacific UNODC office. Today, Jeremy will be presenting on global landscape and challenges in information sharing, interagency collaboration, and policy formulation. And following Jeremy's presentation, we'll open it up for discussion. Thank you, Jeremy. We'll pass it over to you.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Jeremy, may I ask you to speak much closer to your device, please?
Can you hear me now?
If you can move a little bit closer to your computer, that would be great. Sorry about this.
Well, I've got earbuds.
Yeah,
in,
it does.
so-
Your headset doesn't work, unfortunately. The microphone is
Oh.
not picking it up. Yeah, so
Okay, it works to listen. Can you hear me now?
that's much better. Thank you so much, sir. Please go ahead.
Hold on. I've got to use both. 1 second. I can't hear you the other way. I can only hear you this way. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, fine. Fair enough. Tech folks. Seems like we're all having issues. And I'm joining you actually from Europe, where it's really early. So bear with me. Look, yeah, I'm really pleased to be doing this, and thanks, Brian, for the invitation for my talk here today. Some of you know me. I've been working in East and Southeast Asia for the past decade, and I've been, prior to that, working in other countries, but I actually initiated a synthetic drug program many years ago. So what I'm going to say to you today has a lot of context to it. And I'm going to touch on global issues, but I'm really going to zero in on, I think, what would be most relevant to the East Working Group today. Next slide, please. So I'll describe a little bit for you about the rapidly evolving situation in synthetic drug markets, again, focusing in most deeply on those in Asia. Okay. And I think one of the things we have to keep in mind as we go through this is the extent to which the drug markets are closely linked with and impacted by the different and disconnected country responses. And I'll elaborate on what that means in a moment. Basically, though, I think we can all appreciate, those of us that are in the business, that rapid data and information exchange is absolutely crucial. And it's not simply data exchange of one type. We need a plethora, like a broad spectrum of data that should be available to us to help understand the synthetic situation. And then I think one of the things we really have to appreciate is the extent of conversations that are actually underway in regard to this, including where INCHIC is joining from today in Bali. There's a major law enforcement conversation underway for Asia Pacific. The heads of narcotic law enforcement are together talking about drug matters, not simply synthetics, but drug matters writ large. So we have to think about how can we utilize those platforms much better. Next, please. Next slide, please. Next, please. Yeah, so what we've witnessed in the region, if we look at East and Southeast Asia, and if we look a little bit west, there's other elements to this, but if we look at East and Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, we've really seen a dramatic change over the past decade as organized crime groups have revolutionized, in a sense, the drug market. They've essentially scaled methamphetamine production very effectively, and they've done this as they've shifted essentially the market away from plant-based drugs towards synthetics. And when we talk to the countries in the region, and now we're hearing the same in India, we hear about methamphetamine as the drug of concern. Now, if we look back a decade, it would have been maybe about a quarter, third of the country saying that. Then it became 50%. Now it's 100% of the countries saying this. And this is because of the benefits that methamphetamine has provided to the organized crime groups that produce the drug. And the circle that you're looking at on the screen is the Golden Triangle. And that's essentially where the industry has consolidated. So it's essentially migrated in there. We used to see labs seized across the region. Now what we see is essentially labs seized there with one exception. Next, please. This is that exception. This is a lab that was seized, and this photo actually taken by Inchik, who kicked off the session. This photo taken in a synthetic drug lab in Cambodia. You can see the scale of it, the two police standing at the bottom. So our team went in right after the lab was seized. This is the ketamine lab, and that's where I think we should be also focusing. Some of the countries in the region are reporting to us significant jumps in ketamine seizures. But the use of ketamine still remains a mystery in many countries outside southern China, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Those jurisdictions have long reported ketamine use, but we're seeing this in Southeast Asia as well. Next, please. And if we zero in on a place like the Golden Triangle, we see shifts in trafficking patterns taking place over the past years, very pronounced in the past couple of years, as Laos, northern Thailand, next to northern Thailand, has started to play an increasingly large role in regional trafficking patterns. So when we look at seizure data from New Zealand, we look at seizure data from Australia or from other countries, we'll see often Laos featured as part of the route that was used to get the drugs to market. And this is also the case for the chemicals that are going the other way into the Golden Triangle. Essentially, the country has emerged as essentially a chemical trafficking corridor. Next, please. But we also see major changes within the market itself. So while there's a domination by methamphetamine and now the rise of ketamine, we also see a whole range of synthetics. And this is where Asia Pacific, South Asia, Southeast Asia are really playing a global role. So we're seeing the emergence of NPS, new psychoactive substances, from this region, which are cascading around the globe. So we see dozens of substances which trace their roots back to the different industries in this region here. So we see, of course, opioids with chemicals coming back to this region, or we see them themselves coming from this region, but we also see a whole range of other products or mixed products, synthetic products. For example, I noted that just yesterday, we saw Myanmar seized I think it was close to 80 kilos of something called Happy Water, which is a mixed synthetic drug, which has been pushed into the market of the Mekong region in basically a mix of ketamine, methamphetamine, and other substances to in a sense, mimic ecstasy, but it's a drinkable product. Thank you. Next. But to come to the point of chemistry, what we have started to witness in Southeast Asia is major developments in the use of alternative chemicals to produce drugs. So we don't see really the seizure of the essential chemicals, those in the international control lists anymore, or very limited amounts of those chemicals that are seized given the volumes of drugs that are coming out, the hundreds of tons that are seized in recent years. But what we do see is what are often referred to as pre-precursors or legal chemicals, in a sense, that are being diverted and pushed into chemical production, which then becomes drug production within the same area where the Golden Triangle drug labs are. Next, please. But to come to the point of how do we navigate this, how do we understand this? So we have some information systems that we manage. We have, of course, global mechanisms, the three at the bottom, the annual report questionnaire, the individual drug seizure database, and the early warning advisory, which our colleagues here at the scientific and forensic section in Vienna manage. But we also have a regional mechanism, which is the Drug Abuse and Information Network for Asia Pacific, or DINAP. It's quite unique in the sense that all of the countries of East and Southeast Asia have, for the past 18, 19 years, been putting data into this system. Now, it's still very supply side heavy data. Seizures are very prominent in the system, and there are pronounced weaknesses, but nonetheless, it's this mechanism which is in place, which all of the countries are feeding data into, and it results in an annual report, which we produce. The screenshot of the latest on the right there. And that report really has proven to be a helpful discussion starter for the ASEAN group of states in their meetings and in some of the other regional meetings. Next, please. That report and some of the other mechanisms which we have been using, particularly I would say the early warning system, have proven to be helpful for states to understand the landscape and to understand the challenges that they're facing, and they try to piece together the different types of data that you'll be needing. Next, please. But as I said, we've also been looking at the chemicals, and one of the things that we have tried to do is map out the understanding of the governments in the region, given the situation that they're facing, but also understand the regulatory frameworks under which those chemicals are managed, be they legal, widely tradable chemicals or internationally controlled chemicals. And by understanding those systems and the complexity of those systems, we've been able to advise some of the governments on how to address some given what I said earlier about the creative chemistry which is currently used to produce synthetics. Next, please. I think one tool that is underutilized is starting to be utilized, but can be utilized much better. And I think there's a lot of work to be done here. And I think it will prove to be very helpful going forward is the early warning system on NPS. And there's a data dashboard which we are encouraging states to use. And I'm quite pleased that some of the work that INSHIC and colleagues have been doing has been getting states to sign up to this, to start to share what they're seeing as emerging within their marketplaces. And that's something which we really need. And I think a key underlying message of what I'm saying, but also what you'll hear from others, is the speed of data exchange needs to be picked up. Next, please. So I touched earlier on the fact that there's ongoing meetings that we need to utilize better. There's the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which is a global discussion where undoubtedly the Synthetic Drug Coalition will feature quite heavily, but also the one that INSHIC, Reiner, and even our demand reduction team are at the moment, which is Hanlia, the heads of narcotic law enforcement agencies, Asia Pacific. That meeting is underway in Bali, hosted by the Indonesian government with us. And that really brings together key law enforcement policymakers. The other mechanisms which I think we need to make much, much better use of in terms of how this coalition can push out messaging is the ASEAN Senior Officials on Drug Matters, which rotates, it's moving from state to state on a given year. And that is great because what it does is it gets the police chiefs, the drug police chiefs together to compare notes and talk about what's emerging and what's happening in their markets and also what they're doing, mainly on the supply side, but there's also some demand side discussions which are taking place. The Mekong MOU, which brings together the Mekong states to talk about a range of responses that they have, law enforcement, justice, and health. The RILO AP, which is the World Customs Organization, and there's other regional meetings. For example, ADLAMICO, which will soon be hosted by Korea, ADEC, which will be hosted in January by Japan. Those are pre-existing mechanisms which we utilize to move our messaging, but also they can be utilized to move forward the coalition messaging. Next, please. Some of the challenges that we've been observing, to understand the synthetic drug situation, you need rapid exchange of information and exchange of different types of information. But data sharing still remains limited. And this is where I think for all of us that have witnessed the rise of opioids in North America, or recently, as I've touched on, even ketamine in Southeast Asia, we need rapid turnaround. So data sharing between law enforcement authorities needs to be rapid. It needs to be improved and picked up, particularly within certain countries and certain parts of the region where the data exchange remains completely or very, very limited. There's also limitations amongst different authorities. Law enforcement agencies in the region need to talk much, much more extensively with public health officials. Often public health officials pick up information before law enforcement because they may see overdose, they may see health impact in hospital settings from drugs that police are not seeing through seizure. And the same is true of forensic information. We need much more exchange of forensic information to understand what's actually in the market. But even justice authorities need to be a part of this equation. And this full picture, if you will, that can be drawn through the different types of data that these different authorities will have potentially access to, can help us to understand and respond to the situation. Next, please. But there are significant challenges that we've observed. There are really pronounced gaps related to demand patterns of toxicology. Very few countries in Asia, and that includes all the way across West, South, and East Asia into the Pacific, are gathering or utilizing demand pattern data. Most governments in the region remain in the dark, if you will, in terms of what is available in their market, how it's impacting the users within their market, and very, very few have toxicology data. This reflects an investment that has been made in the region really on the supply side over the years, but it has really meant that there has been a limited investment on the demand side, the health side, and toxicology. Where we have seen toxicology data, we've seen some quite interesting things emerge. For example, Thailand picked up fentanyl overdose a few years ago, which we reported in our annual report. And that was picked up through coroner information through some spot testing of overdose death. But that would never have been known by the police because they didn't look for that. We got it from the university. So that's the type of information that needs to get into the hands of different authorities, particularly law enforcement in that case. There's also very much a lack of forensic capacity across the region to detect emerging substances and purities. What we see at the moment is 3 or 4 countries in East and Southeast Asia which are testing the substances that they seize beyond simply confirming what they are. So they often don't understand the purity of what's in their own market. The exceptions being Thailand, China, Japan, Singapore. Sometimes some others do spot testing to understand. But this is really a severe limitation which plays out in the other elements that we need them to respond to, particularly the health impact. Without understanding the purity of what people are taking, how are we going to help them? So this is where investment needs to be made. There's also difficulties in collecting geographically representative data. And what I mean by that is that we find sometimes the data we get from governments is very representative of what they have and hold in their capital. But there's a lot of activity across the region that's geographically dispersed, and within countries, the data sharing and exchange is very limited. So there's very limited data, for example, within Laos to feed data into the MTN, which then we get access to. So we have to really encourage and we try to support internal networking within countries. The same is true across South Asia and other countries where we see often very isolated national authorities not networked across their own country jurisdictions to get access to data. That's something which we hope can be addressed, and maybe the Synthetic Coalition can pay attention to those elements. And also the speed. If we had known quite some time ago what we were witnessing in terms of chemical changes, it would have helped. But we only understood later through seizure what types of chemicals were being seized that were later moving into drug production areas. This conversation has now started with the pre-precursors and other non-controlled chemicals that are moving into production, but this was not understood. Why? Information was not shared quickly. Governments weren't looking for these things, and therefore there's delay in understanding response, and the response is quite delayed. Next, please. One of the things that remains limited as well is the information sharing between government and private industry, be that the chemical industry or the healthcare industries and sectors. And this is an area where those industries can also have information and will need to play a key role in response going forward. Very few countries are having private sector engagement, and it's something which we're really looking at encouraging. And again, the coalition can play a role in that encouragement. Next, please. The mechanisms to develop national and regional policies. As I touched on before, there are global mechanisms and discussions, the C&D being the most important. There does tend to be a time lag, as we're very familiar, to get a substance controlled. It takes quite some time through a very lengthy process. So there is some delay that takes place. So they tend to be slow. They tend to be somewhat general. And engagement, sadly, from the Eastern region remains limited into the C&D. So for example, aside from, there are some large delegations that go, but in terms of their engagement in the resolutions, their engagement in the decisions that are taken, it still remains limited. There needs to be more encouragement of the Eastern region and parts of Asia into the global discussion. So they're much more a part of shaping the policies that respond. But I think at the regional level, there's a really great opportunity to have responsive regional policy frameworks put in place that react to the situation that is most pronounced that they're dealing with. For example, the ketamine situation, which I doubt many people are even looking at in the rest of the world, is really now a situation in Southeast Asia and East Asia and it can cascade into neighboring South Asia. But this is a conversation which is regionalized and needs to be enhanced at the regional level. So what I'm getting at is we can utilize those regional mechanisms to have regionally responsive policies and strategies to deal with, in this case, ketamine or the chemicals that are going into ketamine production. Next, please. The way forward, and this is just a quick a summary here, but we really need to reinforce those existing regional discussions. I've touched on that a couple of times already. Help the states with less capacity to engage in those discussions meaningfully. And this would be also interregional in nature, South Asia and Eastern Asia having a conversation. I know that they just had one brokered by the Indian NCB and INCB to talk about precursor chemicals. Great, but there needs to be more of that. And there needs to be also an attempt to bring up the countries where the organized crime are migrating their operations, those low capacity countries that are being taken advantage of have to have help to engage in their own regional mechanisms to have meaningful discussions and, of course, good response. There also has to be support and encouragement for networking of data and information development. The change is very rapid in the synthetic drug landscape, and it has remained so for some time, and yet the policy does not shift with the change. We still see very, very heavy supply side approaches, which is essentially a seizure-based approach, which, as we all know now with synthetics, doesn't really yield any change, because with synthetics, you simply produce more. And you can't seize your way out of this problem. There has to be other ways of dealing with it. But there is still that existing policy framework. So there has to be rapid information development, which feeds into that policy framework adaptation and consideration in those discussions. But that will require addressing regional data gaps and improving that exchange. And that means investment in demand and forensics in particular, and in chemical understanding for many, many countries. And then, of course, enhancing cooperation between different types of agencies and experts, which is exactly what this conversation is about today. So we're grateful to be a part of this, and I'm happy to make whatever contribution I can make to moving forward the conversation that improves cooperation between different types of agencies, be they law enforcement or be they law enforcement with other types of authorities, demand, forensic, or justice authorities. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope that helps set the stage for what will be a good conversation today on framing the issue and moving forward some of the policy discussions. Thank you.